Welcome back, guys, to the podcast. Today, I have Rob Sultan. Rob is the founder of Sultan Ltd, a leadership coaching and consultancy firm based in Essex. And so he has over 40 years of global leadership experience. And he also has a book called The Action Gap. So the reason I wanted to speak to you today, Rob, was to hear about your story, which we're going to get into in just a second. But why don't you just start by telling us a bit about yourself and what you guys do at Sultan?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you said, I've been in business for about 40 years and I've managed to be a leader. I've been a managing director, a CEO. I left my last proper job about 2013. And since then, I've been involved in coaching, leadership coaching, and I've recently written a book called The Action Gap. And the action gap is born out of my experience working with leaders, that there is a gap for everybody, but for almost everybody, between what they learn and what they do. And we've all got an action gap, me included. But in some cases, that's so extreme that people are learning huge amounts of stuff but doing virtually nothing or nothing with it. So my challenge to myself was to try and discover why that was, but also help those leaders fill that gap and decide what, if anything, they're going to do about some of these things. Because the good news for everybody is that there is a massive amount of consistency between different teachings. It's not like you could go on 50 different courses and the themes and the ideas are broadly the same. They come at it from a different angle, they talk about it in different languages, but there isn't a great deal of inconsistency in the way people present themselves in business. That's good news, because that means if you learn something over here, it will be similar to what you might learn over there. So adding more learning, whilst that's never a bad thing per se, my view is better to take what you've learned and learn what to do with it, to learn new stuff that you might never do anything with. So my business practice is all about the practical application of learning, but also asking that rather impertinent question, so what? Because if you've learned something that's amazing and you think it's amazing, and I say, so what? The question I'm asking is, so what are you going to do with it? How will that affect your life? How will that affect your business? How will that affect your whatever it is you're doing? Because if the answer is, I don't know, or it won't, then my interest in that particular thing starts to fade, because I'm thinking, well, that's great. You've learned something and I'm delighted for you that you've learned it, but you're telling me it's not actually going to make any difference to anything I do or anybody I come across. That's less exciting. If you said to me, oh, well, as a result of that learning, I'm going to do X and Y and I've got all these plans, that's more interesting. So I'm interested in working with leaders who are going to do something at the end of it. So Action Gap is really the forerunner to Action Plan, because it says, look, at the end of all of this, let's agree what we're going to do. Even if there's a chapter in my book called Nothing is Something. And it's this idea that when people say, I'm not going to do anything, and the words don't help, but this idea that doing nothing isn't actually something. Nothing is something. Because if you've decided that you're not going to do anything, that may be a perfectly legitimate decision. You may be right doing nothing, but don't be fooled into thinking that that isn't something. It's always something. In fact, it could be argued a more dangerous something than whatever action you may have taken. I think there's a language side to that, and people say to themselves and others all the time, "Oh, I've decided not to decide." And I said, "Well, it is a decision. You've decided not to decide, but that is a decision like any other."
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that in business. So some people call it kicking the can up the road. People who say things like, oh, well, it might sort itself out. I'll just leave it alone for a bit and see if things get better on their own. I'm not saying they never do. They sometimes do. Equally, I've never heard of anybody say, do you know what? I wish I'd left that a bit longer. I wish I'd waited to sort that one out, because if I had, it would have got better on its own. It doesn't happen very often.
No, yeah, you're very right there. And so, where do you find these CEOs and MDs that take action, or do they come to you because they aren't taking action, and do you show them a way that will easily allow them to take action? What does that look like?
So my book has got 12 chapters, and each of those chapters covers a different topic, whether it's the concept of nothing is something, or it's start with why, or it's about things like people and truth. So I've got different chapters. And what I will do is, if I'm working with a leader or a leadership team, I can deliver that content in about 3 hours. I can deliver it in a day or I can deliver it in 3 days. But at the end of that, I'm then willing to work with that manager or that leader or that management team to develop those ideas and turn them into specific actions. So I like to show people what they could do, and then usually 2 or 3 of those things might pop up and become, actually, I'd really like to do that. I'd really like to have a go at that. So you're sort of moving the ball up the field, to use an American term. You're moving 10 yards up the field. It might take you a while to get to a touchdown, but it's about beginning that journey process of that learning turned into action. You only have to do that 2 or 3 times. You suddenly get the bug for it and you start to think, gosh, I don't need to learn more stuff. What I need to do is look at what I've learned and do something with it.
What do you feel like is the biggest mistake that most leaders make that stops them from taking action? Like, if there's somebody that's listening and they feel like, I resonate with everything that Rob is saying, I know I should be taking action on things, I know that I don't need to go off and learn more stuff, but I can't seem to take action and I don't know why. What would you say is the main reason that you've discovered that that is the case?
I think it's a combination of, if you read, I read a lot of books and I've looked at a lot of concepts. They are very thin on the what to do bit. So there's a supposition that the what to do bit's obvious, only it's not. So I'd like to think that my process is turning that idea into practical action. So not big words, not fine ideas, but genuine, this is what you need to do on the ground. So it's very stripped back and basic. So, for example, start with why is an amazing concept. I love Simon Sinek. I think he's a brilliant guy. I love his books. I love his TED Talks. But I know hundreds of people who've read those books and loved it as much as me. They haven't done anything with it. When I say to them, so you read that book, you loved it, you thought it was the best thing you'd ever heard, you haven't done anything with it. Why is that? Well, I did try, but it got quite hard. And that's the reality for most people, is that when they try and land an idea, they find it really difficult. So my approach is to say, look, I'm not going to pretend to you that it's easy, because it's not. And one of the problems with start with why, I use the example of start with why. Start with why is all about coming up with your why statement. The problem with why statements is they all sound remarkably simple and easy. And so you read someone else's why and you think, oh, that must have taken them all of 5 minutes to come up with that. But it didn't. Well, I'm saying it didn't. My guess is it didn't, because my average for a why statement is about 9 months. And there's a lot of pain and agony to be got through to get from where you are now to your why statement. And the reason is that you'll spend a long time thinking about it, and you'll get lots of people who will help you by saying, what the hell are we doing this for? It's a waste of time. I've got bigger fish to fry. So the amount of support you get from fellow leaders and your team, I mean, you might be lucky, you might get loads, but I suspect you might not get as much as you'd like. And keeping going when it gets tough is really hard. And I'm trying to encourage leaders to say, look, if you think you're alone in finding this hard, you're not. Everyone finds it hard. Don't look at a why statement and think, oh, that's dead easy. And the problem that creates is that if everybody else's looks dead easy, but you can't find yours, you start to think to yourself, well, maybe there is no why. Maybe I haven't got one. Maybe it's not real. And you start to lose confidence and you run out of road very quickly. And then there's always plenty to do. So it gets put on the back burner and gets forgotten and left in a corner. And it's only when somebody brings it out again and says, look, no, you threw that away. You didn't do anything with it. Come back to it, think again. And so there's the other thing that I would stress to people is persistence is usually the thing that makes the difference. And all successful people, so it's a bit of a shaggy dog story, but a few years ago, I was working in executive recruitment. And the organization that I worked for, quite a big organization, had an idea that if they were to identify qualities amongst their top leaders that were not about experience and time in the job, if they could discover that in young people, like a sort of success gene, if they could find that quality in young people, then they would hire those people because they would become successful. The logic of that was pretty good. The problem they had was when they interviewed their top 200 people, they found that there weren't any real consistencies amongst them, apart from one. They all dealt with setbacks and they were all very resilient. And that's really where I suspect I was part of the birth of the biographical interview. So when you go for a job and they say, tell me about a time that was really difficult in your life and how did you deal with it?
Hmm.
That's what they're looking for. They're looking for signs of a persistent person, somebody who doesn't give up easily, somebody who gets back up when they get knocked down. Because the only thing that all these people had in common is that they were all persistent and able to deal with the knocks. And so finding that in a young person, I mean, it's a smart idea. If you could hire people who've got that inbuilt persistence, they've then got half a chance of making it to the top. That's the theory. But I would say to anybody who's going on a course or reading a book, the enthusiasm that you have in the hours after that course or having read the book, keeping that going takes a lot of persistence and a lot of will in an area where you're clearly not very confident because you've just read it. So it's
Sure,
very easy for people to get, I don't know what the right word is, but get distracted.
for sure. Well, I think there's a lot of really fantastic insight in some of the things that you've said there, Rob. If people are listening, and just as we wrap up here, and they want to check out the book, where can they go? How can they connect?
So the book's called The Action Gap. It's available through Amazon. If you key in The Action Gap and Rob Salter, it will come up. It's in Kindle and paperback form. My publisher is encouraging me to do a audio version of the book, and I probably will. But right now it's available in those two formats. It's a mercifully short book. That's deliberate on my part. I didn't want to write a book called The Action Gap that takes you 3 weeks to read.
Mm.
It's sort of defeating the object. It's deliberately a short book. There's a quote in the book from, I can't remember whether it's Mark Twain or Winston Churchill, but they wrote a letter saying, apologizing for the length of their letter. And at the end, it said, if I'd had longer, I'd have written you a shorter one. And I love that concept that
Uh,
brevity takes time. And so I like to think that I took the time to make my book. It's readable within a couple of sittings, 12 concepts, all 12 ideas, the story of my brain hemorrhage. You could probably read it in an afternoon. So anyone who reads that book and thinks, actually, there's something in that, I'd love to talk to Rob about that further. There are references in the book for how to contact me, how to engage with me. They could do it through the website. So Sultan, all of that's available. And I offer the book in 3 different forms. So a 3 hour, 1 hour, 1 day or 3 day. I also offer peer-to-peer advisory groups. I'm a qualified company secretary. So if they want help with the company governance, I
mm,
could do all of that. So yeah,
perfect.
if anybody wants to talk to me, I'd be delighted to hear from them.
Awesome. I'll make sure to leave links in the description. But thank you again for coming on, Rob. And
Pleasure.
thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.